Good afternoon to all. Today we have with our speaker Dr. Sneha Raman. She is doing her postdoctoral research on Mind, Brain and Behavior Research Center, where she works on multidisciplinary healthcare projects with a team of healthcare professionals, psychologists, behavioral scientists, and engineers. Her area of interest includes disordered speech, speech production, speech perception, signal processing, machine learning, and EEG data analysis. She graduated her bachelor degree on information technology from University of Mumbai, and her master is in acoustic and music technology from University of Edinburgh. She did her PhD funded by Marie Curie Fellowship Program at the University of Basque Countries, IOLAB Signal Processing Laboratory, Spain. Her doctoral thesis was titled on oesophageal speech, enrichments and evaluations, where she explored ways to evaluate and enhance disordered speech using novel machine learning techniques and speech perception metrics. She worked as a visiting researcher at the Fraunhofer Institute of Digital Media and Technology in German and Basic Center of Cognition, Brain and Language in Spain, where she performed experiment on speech perception and electroencephalography. Over to Sneha ma'am.
Thank you very much for the introduction and good afternoon, all of you. I'm going to start presenting now. You can all see it, right? Jagan Bandhu,
Yeah,
just let me know if you can. Okay.
able to see.
So, yeah, thank you for the introduction. So, my talk today is basically a condensed version of the PhD work that I did, and it's titled Disordered Speech, Intelligibility, Listening Effort, and Enrichment. Um, so, this will be the flow of the talk, and I'm going to get straight to the problem that I was aiming to solve. So, firstly, we know that speech communication is an integral part of our lives. We get a lot of things done through verbal communication, and being able to communicate properly and getting our needs fulfilled by speech is an important aspect of our life and affects the quality of our life as well. However, some people are not so blessed and they have speech disorders, which makes it difficult for them to communicate verbally. And the speech disorders are mainly because of some abnormal speech characteristics, such as you may have heard, for example, stuttering or these kind of speech disorder. People who have suffered a stroke, they have problems with speech. So what happens is they end up facing a lot of difficulties in communication, and my project dealt with a particular kind of speech disorder, which is known as esophageal speech. And this speech happens to be in persons who've undergone this operation called laryngectomy. And what that is, I'll explain in the next slide. So here you see two images. On the left, you see a healthy laryngeal speech production, which most of us have. And on the right, you see an esophageal speech production. So as you can see in the healthy speech production, I hope you can see my pointers. So I've circled here, which is the larynx, and it has the vocal folds and the esophagus. And what happens in the esophageal speech production is after a laryngectomy, they have to remove the larynx and they make two separate pathways. So this pathway, the trachea, is for breathing, and this esophagus is for having food. But because they do not have vocal folds, they have to use the vibrations of the esophagus to generate speech. So it is like generating speech from a burp. So you make a burp sound, and that has some vibration, and that is used as the source of speech to generate sound. So what happens is their speech sounds very low frequency, like whispered speech. I would play examples of this kind of speech and the enrichments that I've done through a demo in the end. So you'll have an idea what is that kind of speech. So basically, this is what happens with esophageal speech. They don't have vocal folds, and as a result, they have to use the esophagus, the vibrations from the esophagus for generating speech. So I was going to play some examples, but I'll just play it on the demo. Um, so these are the challenges faced by people with esophageal speech. So first of all, there is an effort in producing speech because you have to produce it from the esophagus. And also once the speech is produced, it's disordered, it's not very clear. And that becomes a barrier for communication. And in today's world, we know that we use a lot of digital devices and voice input based systems. So that becomes an additional barrier for people with speech disorders. And all this results in a poor quality of life. These are the obvious challenges for the speaker, but there are also challenges for the listener. And that is that a listener finds it also difficult to understand disordered speech, and listening to such disordered speech for a long period of time causes fatigue, and that results in a poor quality of communication for the listener as well. Yeah. So now these were the aims of our research, which is to improve communication for esophageal speakers, which meant in the digital communication area and also the face-to-face communication area. To improve communication for esophageal speech listeners, which namely is to improve intelligibility, reduce listening effort. And what is listening effort? I'll explain as well in the following slides. Apart from that, we were also interested in listener differences, whether a certain group of listeners understood that speech better versus some other group, depending on their cognitive abilities and their familiarity with the speaker, etc. And some other speech, another aim was to obviously improve this disordered speech using modern speech technologies and machine learning algorithms. And finally, we were also interested in much better evaluation metrics because a lot of speech enhancement research has very basic unidimensional ways of measuring improvements. And we were interested in looking at more subjective, more in depth ways of evaluating the speech. So, here's some background about the kind of speech, specifically the esophageal speech. So as you can see on the right, you have esophageal speech, a small section of a signal. I think it's a vowel, like ah or oo, spoken by an esophageal speaker versus healthy speaker. So in the healthy speech, you can see that it's very periodic, which means that it has a steady fundamental frequency. However, this cannot be seen in esophageal speech. And in fact, even if there is a periodicity, it seems to be of much lower frequency. Uh, Now, looking at the.
Sneha.
Yeah,
So just can you go to the previous slide?
yes,
See here for this esophageal speech, will
yeah.
there be any glottal vibration? Glottis, because
No,
there's some periodicity is observed here. That's why I just I ask.
yeah, that is the periodicity that is generated from the esophageal tube.
Oh,
So
okay.
even if you do a burp,
Hmm.
it's like a very low frequency sound, like you
Hmm.
know.
Okay.
So there is that low frequency vibration.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. So now looking at the pitch curve, this is made using PRAT. So PRAT is a software used widely in speech research for calculating the pitch and all that. So the image here demonstrates that it is not able to really generate the frequencies for esophageal speech. So as you saw here, there is a lower frequency element here, but it's actually showing in a very high frequency. So this is to demonstrate that software tools made for speech research are not able to do the job for speech like esophageal speech. So now, so enrichments of this of disordered speech is usually there is a lot of research with machine learning improving disordered speech. So one of the methods used is called voice conversion. So basically, you take the idea is to use the voice characteristics of disordered speech and map it to the voice characteristics of healthy speech. So voice conversion is usually used in like changing the identity of a person or changing gender, that kind of research, but that has been applied in disordered speech research. So this is the approach that we've gone ahead with as well. So that involves learning the mappings between the two different kinds of speech, the spectral characteristics, the voice and voiced characteristics, and then using that mapping to convert disordered speech into healthy sounding speech. Some background about intelligibility. So I'm not sure how. Yeah, I'll just explain what's on the slide because I'm not sure what is the knowledge level of the audience. But here you can see a person saying, "I need some water," and the listener understands it as "I am some water," which means there is an error of one word that makes the intelligibility 75%. Um, a similar case can occur when it's the machine on the listening side. In this case, the intelligibility is 50% because it has misheard one word and it didn't hear one word at all. So there are two errors out of four words. Um, Now, let's go to listening effort. So look at the case where two listeners are understanding the message the same way. So basically their intelligibility is same, even though the one of the listeners could have taken more effort in doing the same task, in deciphering the same message compared to the other listener. So this is where listening effort comes into play. And there are many different ways to evaluate listening effort. One of them is like Likert scale, basically rate the listening effort from 1 to 5. That is a popular method. There could also be visual analog scales like from no pain to worst possible pain. So here it would be no effort to a lot of a lot of effort. So that is the visual analog scale. But there are newer methods to measure listening effort. Some of them are like pupillometry. So the size of the pupil is known to be related to listening effort, meaning the bigger the size of the pupil, more is the effort taken by the listener. Another method is also EEG, electroencephalography, which is the method that we have chosen. And some measures of the EEG signal and some frequencies have been related to listening effort. So that is something we've studied in the context of esophageal speech as well. So we were looking to close some of the research gaps. Um, there are many new machine learning algorithms being developed very fast. However, they are not always applied for disordered speech. So there's a gap there. Again, listening effort is something that is evaluated a lot in the context of speech in noise and non-native speech and other more popular researches. Uh, it is not so applied so much for disordered speech. And we have calculated ASR and HSR. ASR is automatic speech recognition, that is with machines, and also human speech recognition. Most research is dealing with only one kind of speech recognition. So here there's a combined approach and a comparison of both. Mm. So, and also disordered speech perception research is done mostly on words and vowels and smaller sections of speech. Here we work with sentences, making it more realistic, more real environment based. Um, so basically, the idea is to bridge the gap between speech enhancement studies and speech perception studies. So there's a lot of things going on in speech perception studies like listening effort and subjective evaluation and um, measuring all these speech improvements with subjects and new technologies, biomarkers. And there's a lot of research happening in speech enhancement in enhancement studies like new machine learning algorithms to improve. So this is an attempt to bring both of them together and have a wide but in-depth study. So this is the research material that we had. We had 100 sentences spoken by over 35 healthy speakers. And we had the same 100 sentences spoken by 31 esophageal speakers with a wide range of proficiency. There were also some word recordings and sustained vowel recordings. You can find the details of the database on this paper. And if you're interested, you can use this database to do your own research as well. So firstly, we did some preliminary evaluation. And here we did an experiment, and it was web-based, where there was the sentence being played, and the listener, the participant, listened to the sentence, typed the sentence, whatever he heard, and marks the listening effort based on a Likert scale. Basically, 1 for least effort to 5 for most effort. And so we got from that intelligibility, because we calculated how much of the sentence typed was correct. We got listening effort from the rating, and we also directly calculated automatic speech recognition scores by feeding the sentence directly into some ASR systems. So, and we had 57 participants in all, and these are the results for intelligibility. And I have, so here there are, in the speaker ID, whatever starts with O, they are esophageal speakers, and these are healthy speakers. So we took 2 healthy speakers and 4 esophageal speakers for this study. And we calculated the word error rate. And the blue and the orange, we have divided the participants into 2 categories. Participants who are familiar with esophageal speech, such as their spouses or friends or family members who have, or caretakers who have the habit of listening to that kind of speech, and then non-familiar speakers. So blue was non-familiar, orange is familiar. So firstly, what you can see is healthy speakers have less word error rate compared to all the esophageal speakers, which is expected. Healthy speakers are more intelligible. And within the esophageal speakers as well, there are speakers ranging from different intelligibility measurements. And when you look within the participants, there is not much difference in the intelligibility of whether they were familiar or non-familiar with esophageal speech. However, moving on to the listening effort ratings, we see a similar trend when you compare listening healthy speakers and esophageal speakers. Healthy speakers have less listening effort when listening to them. Esophageal speakers have more listening effort. However, here we can see, interestingly, that for esophageal speakers, participants who were familiar with esophageal speech reported less listening effort compared to participants who were familiar, compared to participants who were not familiar. So basically that means that if you're familiar, you're experiencing less effort. So this was an interesting point, insight from our research. Now going to the ASR, we did a comparison of ASR scores versus HSR. So ASR scores were higher for all kinds of speech. So there was higher error rates for automatic speech recognition.
I have a query. So how the listening effort you have computed?
So it was computed by asking them what was the listening effort you felt. In this, the first study, we have done a very simple approach for listening effort, just rating.
Okay.
So they have a rating from 1 to 5.
Mm-hmm.
So this is the average rating, the bar graphs.
Okay.
Yeah, is that good?
Yes.
Okay. So yeah, there are ASR differences, and what we notice is the differences for esophageal speech is even more, meaning ASR speech has way more errors for esophageal speech than healthy speech. So these were the insights, as I already explained from the first evaluation, that OS is less intelligible than HS. Esophageal speech is more effortful than healthy speech based on subjective ratings. So being familiar with esophageal speech has no effect on intelligibility, but it has an effect on listening effort. This was a second preliminary evaluation, and here we added the extra metric of EEG data. So the task was very similar. to the first one, except that now we have captured the EEG data. And in addition, we also captured the cognitive task scores of the listener. So now we have a measurement of the listener as well based on how well they do cognitively challenging tasks. So in this case, it was the working memory capacity task. I'll explain to you what it is. So firstly, a little bit about EEG. So EEG, as you can see, is it's a raw time series signal. So it's basically the difference in the potential between the scalp and so part of the scalp. So there are electric potentials on your scalp. So EEG measures exactly that. So while it's being measured, it's a raw data time series. So each of the so depending on how many electrodes there are, you get that many time series. So now from the raw data, you can't say much, but you can extract different frequency bands of that raw EEG data. And there is research to suggest that each of these bands are related to different processes in the brain. For example, delta waves are related to sleeping, like slow wave sleep. So if you observe the EEG of a person and you see like this delta wave, you can tell that this person is sleeping. So similarly, if you go to the alpha signal, which is 8 to 13 hertz, it is related with attention, like how we pay attention to things, and also as a result, listening effort. So in our research, we have looked mainly at the alpha frequency band of the EEG signal. So I mentioned the cognitive task, right? So we looked at the working memory task, and we calculated the digit span scores, and this was basically the tasks. The experimenter would say 3, 9, 6, and the participant has to repeat it in reverse. And when the participant is successful, we increase the number of digits. So the most number of digits that the participant is able to recall is their digit span. So in this case, it's 3. So what we are calculating essentially is how much information they can keep in their working memory. And by doing so, we were trying to find out whether that capacity, meaning someone who has that big capacity, feels less listening effort or not. So these are the outputs of the first evaluation. So for the word error rates and listening efforts, we get a similar kind of data. The blue is healthy speech, the orange is esophageal speech, more more errors and more effort, just like the first experiment. Now we move on to the EEG data. So here is the comparison of esophageal speech and healthy speech. And this is so on the scale here, this has more alpha power. So we calculated the alpha frequency band power. So yellow means higher power, blue means lower power. So we can see that esophageal speech has higher alpha power in all these regions. And the same information we did statistics on it, and we found that the alpha power was significantly higher, although it was 0.042. It was significantly higher for esophageal speech compared to healthy speech. Another interesting observation was we plotted the alpha power with the digit span scores, and we found a negative correlation, a significant negative correlation for both healthy speech as well as esophageal speech. What this means is a participant, for example, who could recall 7 digits was experiencing or exhibited less alpha power, whereas a participant who had lower digit span scores exhibited a higher alpha power. So these were the insights from the second evaluation. So higher alpha power was observed for esophageal speech compared to healthy speech, and participants with better cognitive capacities had less alpha power, and so surprisingly, alpha power and subjective listening effort had no correlation. There are explanations for this. So they say that alpha power is a combination of the task difficulty as well as the cognitive ability. So there are task external factors and the task, no, listener external factors and the listener internal factors. So there is a paper to suggest that. So if you're interested in knowing more about why there was no correlation, I'll also link the paper we wrote and you can read further. So now we move on to the enrichment experiments. Um, so first, what we made was a speaker dependent system. The main challenge, so with enrichment, I told you before that there is, let's say, esophageal speech and there is healthy speech. What we were trying to do is map the features, map some of the features of both of these speeches, and then generate a mapping function, and then use that mapping function to generate enriched speech. But the challenge here is, so mostly when it is two kinds of healthy speech, there is this algorithm called DTW, dynamic time warping, and that algorithm aligns these two speeches, and then you can go ahead and do the machine learning experiments. But the problem with esophageal speech is that this alignment itself is difficult because it doesn't have the characteristics of healthy speech. So the features extracted do not allow us to align them properly. So the system that we made was one which did not require that alignment. So that was the novelty of our system. And the way we did it was to use synthetic speech. Instead of using healthy speech, we used synthetic speech that was already aligned with the esophageal speech. There is a schematic diagram to explain how that is done. Uh, so I'm sorry, all my research was in the Spanish language, so this is
Ma'am,
some Spanish words. Yeah,
I have a question in the previous this one listening effort
yeah,
using EEG.
yeah.
How do you exactly compute the alpha band? Because we have EEG on different channels, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there will be different
Okay.
parts of the brain. You're actually there will be EEG signals representing or represented by each channel.
Yes.
So how do you
You're right.
exactly?
So we are calculating it for each electrode. So as you see in this diagram, these are the names of the electrodes. And this is a graphic diagram, and we have interpolated just to show. So
Yeah,
let's say there are 30 electrodes, as you saw here, right? This
yeah,
is the way the electrodes are placed.
mm,
So there are, let's say, 30 electrodes, and you calculate the alpha band for each electrode
yeah.
separately.
Mm,
And most of the research, if you want to know more, the we should look at these P3, PZ, P4. These are the electrodes that this effect has been shown the most, and we can also see this effect in our P4 electrode, and that is here at the back of the head.
yeah.
So this is just based on experimentation and observing, and then experimentation again. So what most researchers have found are differences in the parietal electrodes, but when you analyze data for the whole head and see whether there are differences.
Okay.
So,
Essentially, for each channel, you will be computing the listening effort using each of these bands. Is it?
so I wouldn't say computing listening effort, because at this stage we can only say that it correlates with listening effort. And that
Okay.
is also an ongoing study. So we are trying to know the alpha power for each electrode, and it's mainly observational. We are observing what is happening with this alpha power.
Okay, okay, thank you. I think my
Yeah.
PhD student has a question. Ondala, you can
Okay.
actually ask.
Yes, sir. Ma'am, actually, I want to know how you calculated this power for the each band, for the alpha band.
So we are taking power spectral density.
Okay,
So there's the raw signal, and we do a PSD, like a P-Welch function in MATLAB.
okay,
And
okay,
there
ma'am.
is also a software called EEG Lab, which is in MATLAB, which is used to analyze all kinds of EEG data. So if you're interested in doing that, you can download that. And yeah, maybe there are also EEG data available for online with some other studies, and you can maybe work on it and do your own project or something. So it's called EEG Lab. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
No worries. Okay, shall I move on?
Yes.
All right. Yeah, so this is the schematic diagram for that enrichment experiment. So let's say this is a sentence like IBA space N. So each of them has a vowel as a consonant, and each vowel has a duration, right? So for the esophageal speech database that we had the labeling for each sentence. So we knew which syllable was how much duration, etc. So we were using that text and the duration of that text to generate synthetic speech, which matched temporally. So the synthetic speech was essentially forced to have the durations of the esophageal speech. So what we achieved with this is that we got perfectly temporally aligned signals, and we used that as the inputs to our machine learning system. And the machine learning system itself was not very complicated. It's a bidirectional LSTM, and it's from a software called Merlin, which is an open source software as well, done by the University of Edinburgh. It's a good starting point, I think, to do a lot of the experiments. So the only thing we did was use their network, but change the way we fed the data, completely avoiding the alignment process, which was generating a lot of errors. So yeah, I wanted to play to you the enrichments, but again, we'll play it in the demo, and you'll see how the system has enriched. Okay. So now we have evaluated those enriched systems with ASR systems. One was our in-house ASR system. So this one was the Microsoft ASR system. And we observed that there was not, so let me explain. So this is the unprocessed esophageal speech. This is the improved, enriched one. And this is the synthetic speech. So for all the synthetic speech, you can see that the errors were low. Well, because they were synthetic speech and clear. There was not much improvement in the word error rates. However, we see improvements in percentage words correct. So the difference between these two metrics is that the word error rate considers
Screen is not visible. Hello.
Huh?
Your screen is not visible. Maybe
Sorry?
your screen is not visible. Maybe you have to share it again or something. Just now it.
Yeah, it's not visible. Okay.
No.
I can share it again.
Yeah, please. Just now it goes out.
Maybe I moved that thing which was appearing.
Okay. You can hide that.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. I'll hide it. Right? Can you see it now?
Yes.
Okay. So yeah, these are the results. So the word error
I have
rates.
this query here. So how the synthetic speech you have generated means is it also have this vocal cord vibrations or it's not have?
Yes, it has. So it is a typical synthetic voice like a Siri or, so they have the healthy voice. But except that we are giving them forced durations. So instead of saying hello, and if a esophageal speaker says hello, that they use that duration.
Okay.
So then it's temporary matched. So the intelligibility is good for that because it doesn't matter if the duration of speech doesn't matter for intelligibility, right? So that is good. But we found improvements in percentage words correct, which is how many words were correctly identified, not considering deletions and replacements. So there was an improvement in the number of words that were identified by the system. And this same trend was followed for other ASR systems as well. Again, details of this, I can send you a paper. There are details of this, what kind of ASR system it was, and the exact numbers and so on. And yeah, this is another metric that we used. It's called short-term objective intelligibility. It is known to be correlated a lot with subjective intelligibility scores. And for this metric, we found improvements. So So we did this experiment for 4 esophageal speakers. That is why there are these 4 bar graphs. So for all 4 speakers, there was an improvement. In addition, we also did a preference test. Basically, the idea was we played the esophageal speech and we played the improved speech, and we asked the participants, which one do you prefer? Just that. And we gave them 5 options, which is clearly prefer the first one, prefer the first one, no preference, clearly prefer the second one. Sorry, prefer the second one and clearly prefer the second. So these were the results. So as you can see, mainly you see this one, which was prefer the second one, which was the enriched system. Only in the case of this speaker, there was a indecisiveness. And also this speaker was the least proficient speaker. But even though after the indecisiveness, the most followed option was preference for the improved one. Now, apart from that machine learning based approach, we also did some lightweight enrichment experiments. So here in this case, what you see in the bottom is the signal of the esophageal speaker as it is. And there are sections like these, which is the gulping sound. So because they're creating voice from the esophagus, they have to gulp air occasionally. So it's like, so when I play the demo, you will know what I mean. So this experiment aimed at removing all those gulping sounds based on the labeling that we did. And also we did some other experiments where we just took features from the esophageal speech and fed it into some modern vocoders, and to see whether that is actually adding any fundamental frequency to it. So these experiments were not that successful. The more successful ones were the enrichment, machine learning based ones. So here is the demo. I think now we can play that demo.
Okay.
Yeah, briefly. So should I stop sharing for you to share?
Not required. Maybe you can pause after that.
Okay.
Resume after that.
Yeah, I'll have to resume after that. Yeah.
So is it visible now?
Yes.
Yeah. So I'm playing the original one.
Mm-hmm.
El día 9 de mayo de 1453, el imperio turco se hizo dueño de la vieja ciudad de Constantinopla.
Can you pause it, please? I'll just explain what's going on. Okay, so what's going on? This is the actual video that we recorded from an esophageal speaker. And we tried to superimpose the enriched versions of this speech onto this speaker. So basically, this demo allows you to play around how it would sound if he spoke with those enriched versions. So now maybe you can play and switch between these different enriched versions. And enrichment 2 is the system that I described right now. There is a delay, right?
It seems there is a delay.
Yeah, I don't know why that is. It's a network thing, but it's supposed to be lip syncing with that person. And if you can play enrichment 2.
De Adón dijo, y desde aquí,
Yeah.
justa hacia la guía. Erna, cuazo quintos coche, aiciter, balcolone, guías, y os flafuelza, al, abo, de muenes perón. Portugal que había encontrado, tupan.
That's all I wanted to show. And this is something you can share with other people as well.
Fechas, un hombre llamado Cristóbal Coló intentaba convencer.
Maybe you can resume now.
Yes. Is it visible?
To resume the.
Oh.
Yeah.
Now? Yeah. So that was the demo, and I wanted to show. You can also check it on your own computers. It's available to be shared. Now I'll move on to how we evaluated all these enrichments. So bringing together the different ways of evaluations that we explored and the different ways of enriching the speech, we made this final experiment which involved everything. So there were 5 systems that we evaluated. So the esophageal speech itself, so BLSTM SS was the algorithm that I did as part of my PhD, but there were also other algorithms developed in the lab with other techniques, but we included all of them in this evaluation as well. And we used 100 sentences, and we distributed it 20 sentences per condition. So the experiment was similar to the first one. So the listener listens to the sentence. So in this case, they repeat the last word of the sentence. That is also another way, a quicker way to measure intelligibility. And they rate listening effort. But at the same time, we were doing EEG capture. We did this for 32 participants and had all these metrics: intelligibility, listening effort, and also response times. So response time is how quickly are they speaking the last word, and how quickly are they rating the listening effort. So these are the results. So of course, the intelligibility of esophageal speech, so the intelligibility of all the improvements were lower than the intelligibility of esophageal speech. So that you could say is like an unsuccessful aspect of it, because the aim was to have better intelligibility. However, the most latest system had more intelligibility compared to the previous system, so we knew we were going in the right direction. The story was the same for listening effort, but in this case, we got the listening effort matching to the listening effort of the esophageal speech, but not lower, right? If we look at the EEG activity, though, the alpha power was actually lower than the esophageal speech. And this was the case for other enrichments as well. And it was the lowest for healthy speech, understandably. Another interesting thing is, so we plotted alpha power as the experiment went on. So this is time. This is the first block of the experiment, the 5th one. And what we notice here is the alpha power kept on increasing as the experiment passed. So this is also an indication of fatigue, because alpha power, because it's connected to effort, also reflects fatigue. So that was also an interesting insight. And this is something we should keep in mind when we make design experiments, listening experiments, because the participants towards the end also get fatigued, and that affects the way they rate in the experiment, the way they rate anything, whether it's similarity, quality, whatever it is. Yeah. And these are the ASR results. We had the lowest ASR error rates compared to all the previous systems, and also esophageal speech. And also we had better STOI scores compared to esophageal speech and the other enrichments. So the insights finally are that when you take objective measurements, which is short-term objective intelligibility and ASR, the proposed system outperformed the previous system as well as esophageal speech. However, the same was not observed during subjective intelligibility and these listening effort experiments. Now, this is interesting because most of the speech enhancement research doesn't do subjective evaluations. So it's important because in the end, yes, there are machines at the receiving end of the speech and the improvements, but there are also actual people. So I think when you make improvements, you have to consider the subjective evaluations as well. The only good subjective evaluation result we had was with the preference test, where they preferred the improved one compared to the raw esophageal speech. So alpha power was actually higher for esophageal speech compared to healthy speech, right? And that reflects the task difficulty. And another insight, as I said, was the alpha power kept on increasing as the experiment progressed, which indicated fatigue. So here are the conclusions. So basically, we evaluated esophageal speech with a wide range of evaluation metrics, be it objective metrics like ASR and objective intelligibility, and also subjective metrics like preference tests and biological signals that reflected reflected listening effort. We used some novel DNN-based enrichment methods, and we implemented it on disordered speech. It's a growing field, but it's a very new field, and people are gradually beginning to get into that research. So we contributed a bit towards that research. We evaluated esophageal speech and the enrichments. We explored EEG as a tool to measure listening effort. And honestly, even now, EEG as a tool, there are many conflicting researchers, and it's a field where they're still finding their feet on the ground. So I think it's interesting to put some efforts into this research and to find out what our brain actually tells us about the speech that we listen to. And we have been able to improve esophageal speech as per objective measurements, but not really with subjective measurements. So there is some scope for improvement there. And yeah, we bridge some existing gaps in research, like communicating these two fields of research, which is speech enhancement and speech perception. And I think any task of speech improvement, be it removing noise or improving intelligibility, everything is a marriage of these two fields. And it is as important for the speech to be perceived well by the listeners, human listeners as machine listeners. So yeah, this is some of the future work that we had in mind, but we couldn't do. Basically enrich OS even further with newer machine learning algorithms and newer ways of dealing with the data, and improve subjective measures as well. We could explore the EEG signals even more, such as looking at other frequency bands and what's happening with those bands, and how do they connect with the speech perception, different factors of speech perception. Then the plan was also to have a face-to-face communication aid, like in the demo, have the improvement software and use it as an aid, whether it's on your phone or as a device. And the output that comes from that is the improved version of the speech. And yeah, also integration into mobile devices. For example, if you're doing a Skype call with a relative or somebody, and although you're speaking into the phone with esophageal speech, what the listener hears is the improved versions. So some device, some software integrated into the mobile like that. So yeah, that's all the work that I've done as part of my PhD. And I have to thank all these people. And very quickly, I can tell you what I'm doing right now as well. So I have moved a little bit more into the EEG analysis part of the studies, and I'm right now working in this lab where we have data from epilepsy patients. So there are two aims of that project. One of the aims is, so these epilepsy patients are drug resistant, meaning they don't respond to drugs anymore. So the only treatment they have is to remove the area where the epilepsy occurs. So our project deals with, so you know that brain surgeries are open surgeries, and the person is awake during the surgery, and usually there is a speech pathologist present during the surgery, so that the doctor doesn't touch or damage the areas of speech. So the speech pathologist asks the patient many questions, gives some tasks, and ensures that that speech area is not touched. So our project actually deals with doing speech experiments beforehand, before the surgery, and finding where in the brain is the speech area, so that when they do the surgery, they don't need that speech pathologist there. So that is one part of that project. Another part of the project is to generate speech from brain signals. So it's called brain computer interfaces, and the idea is to take EEG signals and take the corresponding audio signal. So we ask the participant to say a word, and then we ask them to imagine a word. So we want to map the imagined words to the actual speech, and by doing that mapping, generate speech from the brain signals. So these are the research that I'm doing now, which I'm happy to share as well, our project group and the things that we are doing. So yeah, basically there's a lot of scope in wearable technology and doing research with EEG signals and speech improvement and all that. And my aim with this presentation was to just communicate the things that I've been doing and hopefully give you ideas for some research pathways. Yeah, so I can take questions now. I'm going to, this is my email if you want to note down. Or later on, also, we can give the presentation to everybody. I'm open to questions.
There is a question in the chat box, you can see.
Oh, okay, let's see. Yeah, gender variability. I mean, gender variability of the listeners or gender variability of the speaker? This is Sudhakar Pandirajan who asked the question. Speaker. No, but I think there is research to suggest that female voices are more intelligible, but I'm not sure. I didn't do that research, but this research exists, whether there is gender variability. You could look it up. Because everybody in the speech community, we had a conference and we were wondering, why are all these Siri or whoever, they are female voices, right? A lot of the virtual assistants. So it's an interesting question as to whether female voices are more intelligible, especially in noisy environments. Maybe because sometimes noise is on the lower frequencies and female voices are more intelligible on that noise floor. So it's a possibility, but don't take my word for it. You can read up. Okay.
So I have a question. So maybe I have missed out from your presentation. So what are the techniques you are using to enrich the disordered speech? You have seen some BiLSTM or something. How maybe you are doing this?
Yes.
Are you mapping with healthy speech?
Yes. So what we do is we take the esophageal speech and generate from some vocoder parameters, which has spectral parameters, then voice unvoiced parameters, and the fundamental frequency. And this we have the same parameters from the esophageal speech. So esophageal speech and healthy speech. And ideally, before what we were doing is aligning it with some alignment software, which is called Intelligibility. Yeah. But in this approach, we tried this new thing where we didn't have to align it. We just had already aligned speech. But we were doing the same thing essentially. We just took the features and did the machine learning thing without the alignment.
It's like mostly that periodicity information is missing due to this absence of vocal tract. So you are taking the this LPC coefficients kind of thing, or approximating the vocal tract, and you are trying to insert the excitations on that. Is it correct?
Yes, that is the aim. Yes. The aim is to map in a way that the excitation appears in the enriched versions.
Okay. So for that, you are taking healthy speech as a reference.
As an example. Exactly.
From there, you are extracting these excitations and able to synthesize MB speech.
Yeah.
Yeah, please go.
Ma'am, is there any EEG signal difference between epilepsy patient during their imagination and healthy person?
Yeah, good question, because I'm working on that right now. So I just have the data, I have not analyzed it. Yeah, there should be differences. So we hypothesize that when you speak, the motor areas are involved. You mean imagined and not imagined, right?
Yeah, like imagine speech. A
Yes.
healthy person imagining something, and a epilepsy patient
Oh,
is imagining. Is there any difference in EEG signal between them?
uh, yeah. I mean, so with epilepsy patients, the problem is that sometimes they also have minor epileptic activity,
Hmm.
even if it's not a major one. So this is something that is there throughout their signal. Sometimes they are having a minor seizure, and we are observing these things. So in that sense, yes, there might be differences in their brain activity.
Okay.
But we are with the thing is the reason we chose epilepsy patients is because we are using deep electrodes. So all the experiments that I mentioned here were surface electrodes where you don't it's non-invasive. You just put the cap on and stick the electrodes. But in the imagined speech activity project, we are using deep electrodes. So the electrodes are actually drilled into their skull.
Okay.
So we don't have healthy people volunteering for that kind of data. So we don't
Okay.
have comparative data. But
Okay.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
Mhm.
I have another query. So mostly there have some study exist. I think they do with imagined speech EEG signal. They told that they are somewhat correlated with the uttered speech in a healthy condition. I don't know about that disordered condition.
Oh,
So,
hmm,
so can we able to regenerate kind of for it? Suppose a disordered person, can we able to regenerate the
hmm,
excitation information from their means EEG signals?
hmm.
Is there any
You
relation
mean
and
okay?
studies there?
Yeah, I think the thing with imagined speech is even when we speak, we get a auditory feedback of
Correct.
our own speech,
Mm-hmm.
which makes us sure that we are speaking the right thing. So it's interesting you mentioned the stuttering part because maybe because we don't have that audio feedback, the brain signal looks like that. So because this is a new project that I'm doing, I just wanted to share what I'm doing right now. We have not analyzed the data yet, but that's an interesting point. I think
If we can
the
able
the
to
missing of that audio feedback
correct.
can
Correct.
result in the problems in the yeah.
Hmm.
Ma'am, is the dataset is open source? Is it available, ma'am? This imagine speech
Which one?
dataset. This
Uh,
imagine speech dataset.
I now our data we are already we've not finished with data collection, but I can share with you one data set that is publicly available.
Yeah,
It's
it would be
It's a Dutch database, and they
okay.
have made it publicly available. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Can you write to me or so that I
Yeah,
can send it?
yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
I will mail you. In this given
Okay.
mail,
Yeah.
I will mail you. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Please.
Okay. If there have any more questions, you can take.
Yeah, I have one question. Last this
Yeah,
one.
Govind sir.
Mhm.
Ma'am, actually, these objective measures, whatever you have used here, is it
Mhm.
common to all sort of disorders? For example, a patient, a stroke patient, with a
Hmm.
slurred speech.
Yeah. Yeah.
So essentially, their prosodic parameters will be, for example, duration. The
Hmm.
speaking rate will be,
Hmm.
very low. So that
Hmm.
also will affect the intelligibility. So in that case,
Yes.
also this listening effort, all those things will work.
Yes, because it's a uh, subjective measurement. So you
Okay.
as a listener, you're listening to either stuttered speech or slurred speech or dysarthric speech. It's you are evaluating that speech, number one, or even the EEG, you're feeling that listening effort regardless of whatever the stimuli is. So some
Okay.
listening effort experiments are based on visual stimuli.
Okay. Okay.
So it can be any stimuli, and you're just measuring what is happening in terms of effort in your brain.
Okay. Just one more.
Hmm.
Actually, we have some experience with All India Institute of Medical Science. Actually, we are working in this
Okay.
particular thing, especially
Where are
this.
you based? And what's your name?
Basically, my name is Dr. Govind, and my student is actually
Mm-hmm.
asking this question on Lab Banerjee. Actually, we are
Yeah,
trying to
yeah.
have a collaboration on this epileptic data, collection of epileptic data
Okay.
from EEG, I mean, stroke
Uh-huh.
patients. Basically,
Yeah.
AIMS has a department there.
Yeah.
But when we go for presentation, doctors had some difference of opinions with
Yes.
respect to the epileptic patients, because what they have,
Mm-hmm.
majority of the neuro the doctors in the neurology department, they had the opinion that most of the epilepsy, the brain strokes occurring, may not affect speech.
Okay.
So out of
Oh.
this epileptic, this one only 10% of the epilepsy, and there are few cases where the epilepsy, this speech will be affected. So, what is your opinion on that?
Yeah.
Then, I mean,
Yeah, it's possible. I think it depends on where the focus is, where the epileptic focus is, right?
they mentioned about
Uh,
some called epileptic aphasia, which language
okay.
skills will be affected.
Oh, oh, you mean the patient not being able to speak when they have the seizure?
Yes. So,
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know about that.
yeah.
But,
So,
and how does that affect your research? Because
uh,
all this data will be collected when they are not having a seizure, right?
yeah, actually, we collaborated with them to get some data. So the doctors said that there will be an availability of the patient because the frequency of the patient may be less.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what. So I just asked this one to have your opinion or your comments on this, whether you have experienced any sort of.
Well, the only thing we have experienced is difficulty to get data because, of course, the priority of the doctors is giving them relief from their disease. And us being speech researchers, we go there with our experiments and they are like, okay. So that's the difficulty we are facing right now. But because I'm very new to this research, I don't know, but I'm curious to uh, exchange emails with you and also discuss your challenges.
Okay, thank you, ma'am.
Yeah. Where are you based? Which institute?
Actually, I am from KL University. I'm actually a
Oh,
graduate, PhD graduate student of Professor Prasanna.
okay, okay.
Yes, I'm working as a professor here in the Department of
Yeah.
Computer Science. So we
Yeah.
have a
So if you
speech
can
group.
write me an email, that would be great. I can
Sure, sure.
exchange that.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you so
Thanks.
much.
Okay. So
Yeah.
if there have no more questions, let's thanks the speaker. Thank you, ma'am. So let's end the sessions from here.
Yeah. Thank you very much. And it'll be great if possible, you can share the video, recorded video as well.
Yes, yes, yes. I will say.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank
It
you.
was a pleasure talking.